Hey you, and welcome. My name is Mike, and in this old video, what I have for you is a story set entirely in the woods. The woods of the mind, but also the real woods, so I'm not sure why I just said that. Though by that, I mean we're not just going to any old forestino, you know what I mean? We're going to a national forest. The Siskiyou Mountains are part of the Klamath Range, and they are in Northern California, Southern Oregon, so that's where we're gone. Wait, what? The year? It's 1974, if you can believe that. And the Cowden family, 4 of them, check them, were celebrating Labor Day weekend. They would all vanish into those woods. For like a bit. But you know, when they were found, you would almost wish they weren't. Let's give it a go! Wow, what a scene I have for you in this old one, folks. Well, like, the next paragraph, anyways, because after that I'm gonna get into... yeah. But hey, trees, am I right? The Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest straddles the border between 2 states and covers almost 1.8 million acres. That is almost 7,500 kilometers squared, or to use another term, it big. In the forest, you'll find some trees over there, a couple of rocks here, and rivers galore, including Rogue River, which sounds pretty cool. You can go hiking, or fishing, maybe mountain biking, or how about plain old camping. Tourists aplenty during the season, filling up the forest and the myriad smaller towns surrounding the wilds, headed up by Medford, Oregon. And the family I'm talking about, they knew those woods and they knew those towns about as well as you can know them, for they were locals. It was in late summer 1974. Well, I mean, it's autumn. Does Labor Day count as like the last of summer or the start of it? Well, it doesn't matter. The Cowden family were going camping for Labor Day weekend, something they had done countless times before. They were going to a familiar spot, camping in the Siskiyou Mountains right by Carberry Creek near Copper. Here's some pictures courtesy of Google. Cheers, pal. Though our story takes place about 50 years ago, it would have looked, much the same. Yeah, there we go. The Cowden family was made up of 28-year-old Richard Cowden, his wife, 22-year-old Belinda, and their 2 children, 5-year-old David and 5-month-old Melissa. David was in fact a child of Belinda's from a previous marriage, but Richard he absolutely adored him, he loved him, you know, as much as if he was his own child. The Cowdens lived in White City, Oregon. It's on the other side of Medford, about an hour's drive away. As I said, they were natives to that area. They had lived, you know, in like Jackson County and surrounds their entire lives. So this wasn't a case of, you know, some city slickers coming in there, you know, dealing with some yokels. They knew everything and they knew what they were getting into. By that I mean they didn't. Richard was a logging truck driver by trade, had been his entire life, and he loved it. He loved being out in the woods, he was good at it, and he was gearing up for another busy season ahead as you get into the autumn and winter months. Belinda was a stay-at-home mother. Life in the Cowden family was pretty swell and pretty normal. They had a little 3-bedroom home, they were chipping away at the mortgage, they had savings. They were ready for the winter, they had just done up young David's bedroom, and they were going out for one last, you know, weekend away, one last camping trip before the end of the year. The whole camping trip that Labor Day weekend to Carberry Creek, it was actually kind of like last minute. Richard, he initially had plans for that weekend, he was going to do up the driveway, but that fell through, and so they were like, hey, let's go camping. The Carberry Creek campsite is remote enough. It's beside the town of Copper, or rather it was. The town of Copper would be flooded in 1980, 6 years after our story begins, when a dam was built on Applegate River. It wasn't much of a town to begin with, so no great loss there. You had like a shop, a general store, a couple of houses, end of list. So they drove out there on the Friday with their basset hound, old Droopy. He's a good boy. They drove out there, they parked the car on the road, and they went into the campsite. The plan was to spend 2 nights there, the Friday night, Saturday night, and then on Sunday, they were going to stop off at Belinda's mother's house. She lived in Copper, in one of the few houses in Copper. They were going to stop off, have some din-dins with her, and then head back home to White City. It was a beautiful weekend, not a cloud in the sky. So what they actually got up to while camping out there, no one really knows, but it's believed they had a grand old time. So this is a part of the story where things take a turn for the worse and they stop being that grand old time. On the Sunday, the day they were due to leave, at 9 a.m, Richard and young David were last seen. They were last seen in the general store in Copper. It's about a mile down the road. They'd popped in for some milk. You can't do without the milk, lads. They popped in, and you know, the people who saw them, like the worker in the store, said they were a grand old form. They were fine lads, you know, they didn't seem bothered or upset or anything. They were yapping away to them. So they picked up some milk and then they walked back to the campsite. Now, what happened then is the great mystery. So if, you know, Richard and David went to the store to get some milk, that would mean Belinda and the baby were back at the campsite. Could something have happened while the two boys were away? The next thing to happen after Richard and David were last seen that morning was Belinda's mother. You know, they had said they were going to stop off at her house for some grub before heading home. She prepared dinner, you know, that afternoon for them. A lot of grub. She was like, Jesus, where are they? Come on, what's the hold up? They never showed up for dinner. Belinda's mother, you know, they would have shown up, so after a while, she's waiting around. She was like, here, listen, they're only down the road. Let me go check on them. She drove down to Carberry Creek campsite. She found the Cowden's pickup truck. It was still there where they had parked it beside the road. And as she walked into the actual campsite, that's when she began to worry. Now, when she walked in, everything was laid out like they were just there. I'm talking the stove. Their shit was all there, like their Belinda's purse, David's wallet, his keys to his car were there. All their camping stuff was right there, as if they had just were there 1 second ago. There was no sign of her daughter, son-in-law, or 2 grandchildren, not even the dog. But it looked like they'd be back any minute. You know, dishes were there, cutlery was there. There was even the bottle of milk that they had bought that very morning. It was on the table, half full, so they'd made it back to the campsite, and I guess things must have been okay at the campsite if they started drinking, and then after, something happened where 4 of them, 5 counting the dog, just vanished. Everything was in its right place, but it was wrong. Belinda's mother hung around the campsite for some time, calling out, checking the nearby river, doing the whole shebang. The fact that all their stuff was right there and they weren't, you know, well, it didn't look like they were also expecting to go anywhere, because the purse was there, the keys were there, right out in the open. You know, if they had gone for a quick hike or a quick walk or even out to the river, they wouldn't have left, you know, stuff like that just lying out there where anybody could come across it, even if they'd only been gone for 10 minutes. Maybe they had an accident at the river or something like that. She checked. No sign. It was like they disappeared into nothing. And as evening approached, Belinda's mother, she drove back home and called the Jackson County Sheriff. Troopers went out there, back to the camp, and it was just as she left it. Still no sign of the family, but also nothing wrong, no blood or signs of violence. Creepy was how it was later described. So you know what they were immediately thinking. Bigfoot finally has his taste for man flesh. The next morning, a full search began for the Cowdens. But before it did, they got a lead. Droopy turned up. He had wandered into the town of Copper in the middle of the night, and he had been scratching at the general store door. Let me in, for fuck's sake! Questioning him, unfortunately didn't lead anywhere. So the search began, and it would be one of the biggest in Oregon history. Pick a random acronym, it was there helping the search. Whirlybirds with infrared. Dogs, which led nowhere. Everything, roads, looking for tire tracks. Everything was searched and nothing was found. The whole shebang, but nothing. It didn't look like the family had just left of their own accord. Everything was laid out as if they had expected to be right back. And it wasn't like they would just, disappear into the woods, leaving all their shit there. I'm talking, there was an expensive watch there, his wallet, cash, Belinda's purse, cash, all that kind of stuff. It looked like they had left for 2 minutes and something had happened, or something had happened while they were there in the camp, maybe even getting ready to start packing up and leave. Everywhere around was searched. Caves, mines, the woods, waterways were searched, and, through the rocks in case, they'd fallen into the water, their bodies would have washed up somewhere. Their house back in White City, nothing. Hadn't been touched. The police began to think the family had been taken from there, probably against their will. But if they had been taken, why hadn't an expensive watch been taken, cash been taken, the Cowden pickup truck, and the keys were still there? If they had been taken, why weren't they robbed? Like, someone could have tried to take a young woman, and her baby, but there was evidence that Richard and David came back because of the milk was there. So, trying to abduct an entire family, though? The search was super intensive for the first week, but would die down with no leads. The family's home life, it seemed great. They weren't earning the big bucks, but they were doing okay. Whatever happened, they hadn't planned on it. The families, they helped out Richard's dad. He'd been a trapper. He knew the wilderness well. Nothing. Rewards were offered, hunters heading out there for the season, keep an eye out. Squat. Autumn would turn to winter, to spring, with no sign of the Cowdens. People requested the FBI get involved, but as there was no evidence of a crime, they couldn't. Not yet. On the 12th of April, 1975, so about over 7 months since the Cowdens vanished, 2 young men were in the woods about 7 miles-ish east of Carberry Creek, near a place called Sturgis Fork. Few mountains in between. They were out prospecting for gold, baby. Some of that natural bling. And as they were wandering through the woods, they came across a very scary and horrific sight. Bones. At first, they saw bones on the forest floor. Small ones kind of littered around. And then eventually, looking up, they saw a skeleton tied to a tree. Scattered around it was a lot more bones. It had been there for some time. They immediately booked it, as I would, and called the cops. The police arrived and secured the area, and from dental records they could tell that it was Richard Cowden who was tied to the tree. This was now a crime scene, and it was also now like something out of a horror movie, finding a skeleton bound to a tree. The police, they immediately, secured the area and were going around hoping that maybe nearby they might find Belinda and the 2 children, and, well, not far was a cave, the entrance covered over with smaller rocks. The authorities moved them and went inside the cave. Inside were the bodies of Belinda, David, and Melissa. They had finally found the Cowdens, and it was horrific. So, examining the bones that were left behind, both Belinda and young David had been shot in the head with a .22, like a rifle, a .22 caliber. The baby, Melissa, she had been beaten to death. And Richard, who was the one bound to a tree, they couldn't tell how he had been killed. He had no bullet marks on his bones or on his skull. So he had been tied to a tree and then either stabbed to death or strangled. Whether this was after or before his wife and children were murdered, we don't know. One idea that quickly came and then went was that Richard had done this himself. He had murdered his wife and 2 kids and then killed himself. But, I mean, 1, he was found tied to a tree, so he couldn't have done it himself. And 2, the rifle that was used has never been located. So if he had done it, the murder weapon couldn't have been far. So whoever did this was likely a local. They knew the area and they knew it well. One other really strange and very creepy fact is that the area the bodies were found in, the tree and the cave, which were close to each other, that area had been searched back in September, a week after the Cowdens went missing. There was no one there at that time. The guy told the police, yeah, I searched that area. He could confirm the exact cave he had searched, and he said, yeah, they definitely weren't here. So what that must mean is that the Cowdens, all four of them, must have been kept hostage, kidnapped, somewhere for about a week before they were brought to that location, maybe after the search died down, and then they were killed. Maybe the person who did it took part in the search. I mean, they must have been alive because it seems like they were definitely killed at that spot because shell casings were found at that spot. Also, why would you bind a man to a tree if he was already dead? So what the hell happened over that week? The police, obviously, they wanted to speak with anybody who had been in the area around the time of, the believed abduction had taken place. Now, some campers had seen Droopy the dog a couple of miles away from the Carberry Creek campsite, but they didn't think anything of it. They just saw a dog wandering around. The dog would eventually make its way to Copper. Though another family who were up there from LA, they also went up there to camp, and they'd seen something quite strange. They arrived to the campsite on the 1st of September, which is the Sunday. So they arrived there after the Cowdens had been abducted. When they got there, though, they said they saw 3 people, 2 men and a woman, in a pickup truck. And they just said those people really gave this family the creeps. It seemed like they were waiting for this family to leave, and they creeped them with so much they just left. Could that have been Richard, Belinda, and the killer? The killer had a gun in there holding them in the truck. There has only ever really been one suspect in this case, so let's give it a go. Dwayne Lee Little was 25 years old in 1974, from the town of Rutch, near the National Forest. He had been paroled from the Oregon State Penitentiary 4 months before the Cowdens visited Carberry Creek. He had been in prison for raping and murdering a teenage girl named Orla Phipps. He had been, a charming, good-looking kid, class president. Orla, she had been a neighbor of his. Why he did what he did to her at 15 years old, no one really knows why. She just went out horseback riding one day. She never came back, and her body would eventually be found. Now, Dwayne, he did suffer head trauma when he was quite young, which is something we see in killers quite a bit. It's also believed his mother was inappropriate with him. Not that she was raping him, but a bit like Psycho or something. When her body was found, there was more than enough evidence to convict him, and he was sent away for 10 years. Well, he wasn't sent away for 10 years, but he made parole after 10 years. When he got out in May 74, he worked in a warehouse in Medford. Dwayne's parents lived not too far from Carberry Creek. He lived with them, and he had been in Copper on Labor Day weekend. When asked, he denied any knowledge of the Cowdens, said he had never met them, never seen them. Now, Dwayne's girlfriend at the time, she would tell the police after Dwayne cheated on her, so she would tell the police that Dwayne in fact owned a .22 caliber rifle. So, 2 things with that. Well, one is, as a convicted felon, he's not allowed to possess a firearm like that, or at all. And 2, that's the same caliber gun the Cowdens, 2 of them, had been shot with. He went back to prison for that one, though he was out again in 1977. He was a charming guy. Yeah, very charming. In 1980, a pregnant woman named Margie Hunter, she was driving along near Portland when her car broke down. Portland, Oregon. She pulled over to the side of the road, obviously, and a good Samaritan picked her up and drove her off. He was going to give her a ride home. He didn't. He instead sexually assaulted her, strangled her, and stabbed the shit out of her. Now, Margie would survive, and she would then be able to identify the person that did this to her was Dwayne Lee Little. It was actually pretty easy for her to identify him because they worked together. He got 60 years for that one, and he remains the prime suspect in the Cowden murders. He was a horrific killer. He grew up in that area. He knew that area real well. He owned the same rifle that they were murdered with.
Former Oregon State Police Detective Richard Davis is 81 years old and is one of the last surviving OSP detectives who investigated the Cowden family murders of 1974. Dwayne Lee Little.
People's lives, other people's lives to him are absolutely of no concern. He wants what he wants, and if I have to kill her to get it, that's the way it is.
The truck the family from LA saw those weird people in, well, that was the same truck that Dwayne's family owned. They had the same truck.
That same afternoon, he says an elderly couple claimed they saw a car matching Little's description driving a man and a woman.
The woman said there was a man driving, a woman in the middle, and another man on the right side. And she said, why I remembered is the road was very narrow and we were going slow, and she looked to be crying.
His alibi for what he was actually up to that Labor Day weekend could not be confirmed. He also refused to take a polygraph regarding the disappearance of the Cowden family. He wouldn't do it. He wouldn't take a polygraph regarding their disappearance even when the police said to him, here, listen, you take this polygraph, you pass, we will remove the possession of a firearm charge against you. So he wouldn't have gone back to prison for a second time. He still refused to take the polygraph. He said he would rather go back to prison than have to answer questions about the Cowdens.
You take a polygraph on a missing Cowden family, the murder of the Cowden family. Although the polygraph I can't use in court, you take a polygraph, I'll dismiss this gun case. He said no.
Later, an inmate would say Dwayne confessed to him that he killed the Cowdens, but nothing ever really came of it, and to date, no one knows who did.
What haunts you the most?
I am ashamed. I'm sorry. The Cowden family did not get justice. And I was a part of their not getting justice, and it haunts me.
And so ends this very creepy and disturbing tale of the Cowden family massacre murders. A lot of people find the forest spooky. I think this story is probably a reason why. And it's horrific to think an entire family was taken and held captive. I don't think one man could have done this, though, could have taken the entire Cowden family, whether it was Dwayne or whether it was someone else. I believe they had help. If it was Dwayne, his family could well have helped him keep them, kidnapped for a week before they were taken out and killed. But who knows? Maybe we will never. But it is one hell of a story to tell around the campfire. Thank you so much for watching this old video. I hope you found it as interesting and spooky and all that as I did. Special shout out to Anne Rule's book, But I Trusted You. That was one of the main sources for this video. Don't forget to subscribe, check out your boy on Twitter or on Instagram or whatever if you want to. I mean, you can. Or you know what you can do? You can just shout at the screen right now. I'll find you eventually. Please take care of yourselves because I love you. Mike out.